Go inside the studio with the Ricky Harris Media Podcast. Here's your host, Ricky Harris.
Welcome back to the Ricky Harris Media Podcast. Took a week off to do some rewiring, and I counted it up, and this is still a rough estimate because I'll do a couple recounts, but I think it's approximately 270 solder joints. I knew it was going to be quite a job to do a custom patch bay. So a patch bay allows you to swap. Again, a patch bay is largely for analog studio, which mine is at its core. It's an analog studio, and then I record digitally. Basically, everything is set up like an analog studio would be, but the tape machine is replaced with a digital audio recorder. I really want to go further with that, but those don't really exist like I want. I would love to have it kind of does in tape still. An ADAT machine that uses VHS. I've always wanted to do a session exactly like a multi-track session predating the digital audio workstation days, using an open reel multi-track recorder, but using a multi-track digital recorder. And you're saying, well, Ricky, that's what a digital audio workstation is. But the workflow is different, right? Really an ADAT would probably work pretty good. I probably will just end up getting something like that. Those things are really cool. It basically is a good demonstration of technology available at the time being thought and rethought. My observations, of course. We have this technology here of digital audio tapes, DAT. And if you watch the show Yellow Jackets, the DAT tape is actually featured in one of those episodes. I noticed that immediately. And of course, those same tapes were also I guess still used to some extent for backups, for server backups, data backups, but it was used extensively in the recording industry, as a kind of bridging the gap between traditional reel-to-reel, open reel, analog studio recording to the digital audio workstation to where everything is in the computer. At least, all the production side is in the computer. Obviously, all your sound elements, synth, drum kit, vocals, really anything with an analog output, that's still done, using an analog workflow to some extent. And again, all of this is based on your personal preference. That is definitely the world we live in, where we have a ton of options and you can kind of work how you want to. But anyway, 270 solder joints. And I knew that was going to be a job to wire that in, but I wanted to make it very custom because my studio very largely is a science experiment. It's an ability for me to learn and prove stuff out. I read through research, watch a lot of YouTube videos, collaborate, and then I come in here and then experiment, prove it out. I've got the theory and I've got other people's experiences in my head, but then I come in here and prove it out. And it's not so much proving it out where I'm like, I don't know, that might be untrue. No. It's to prove it out to me so I can see it and better understand it and better communicate it to you on this podcast. It's how I like to work. What's the old thing like in school labs, right? This basically what this is a big lab. labs are really, really good for that. So definitely, you know, obviously, you're not going to spend tens of thousands of dollars on equipment to do this. I mean, this is my interest. This is like one of my main hobbies. So that, that's the reason why I do that. Again, a lot of this equipment is secondhand, and some of it's donated. And I greatly appreciate that. But really, if you're really interested in learning this, definitely rent some studio time and or go collaborate and work with other people that share your similar interests. And then, oh my God, you will learn a lot. And a lot of it too is learning workflow. I mean, God, having your space work for you, that's huge, right? So the patch bay allows me to swap things around. It basically brings every IO input output up to the front panel on the equipment rack. I've got one equipment rack in here, and it's kind of like a sidecar. It sits over to my left of the mixing console, and so it just brings everything out to the front. And that's its main purpose, right? Everything's there, IO, input, output. But also it has some normalization. So when everything is unplugged, everything is in, quote, a normal state. Normal state, would just be the workflow for the studio, which is primarily for tracking podcast and for experimentation. So it has a very unique purpose in this home studio. So everything is normalized. Basically, it is tip ring sleeve, 1/4-inch jacks, 32 of them in 2 single rack unit plates. And so everything's very custom. The connectors actually have switches built in. So when you plug in the phone connector, the tip ring sleeve, a large headphone jack connector into that, it breaks a link. So I made the link. The links are just tied together with just, a 2-inch piece of audio wire. So you've got, those 3 wires are shield, positive, and then 180 signal, 180 out of phase signal. That's what those 3 wires are. And it just goes right to the bottom jack. So that's the normal path. So when you have everything unplugged, those switches are closed, and you've got a normal drop to the jack below it. Not every connection on this is normalized. And again, that's not traditional, but my studio has a very, very specific purpose, and everything is clearly labeled on there. I've got arrows that point down. The arrows that are pointing down, those are normalized jacks. The technical term for it is full normal. So mine is full normal. So it's basically the exact opposite of me. I'm not even half normal. Seriously though. Yeah, so it's a full normal patch bay and it completely customized. So I knew that getting into it, this was going to be quite a job. So yeah, it took 3 days to wire this up. And a large portion of the reason why it took that long is because I don't have, that much time to dedicate to it. I kind of, work on it when I can, bits and pieces. And it was a lot of fun. I will say it was, about day 1.5, you're just in the midst of it. I was like, oh man, I knew this was going to be a lot of soldering and a lot of, trial and error. So I went through the debugging process. I had the main thing I ran into with the digital recorder and having it interface into the patch bay was making sure I can send phantom power off of the recorder into the patch bay to power this microphone that I'm talking to you right now. Because right now I'm running through all of this, but I'm just using the normalized portion of the rack. So all it's doing is just passing it along. This setup right now is just the Rode NT1 going through the normalized channel on the patch bay right into the recorder. That's all it is. So I'm in the acoustic space mainly to give it a good room tone. And of course, to be able to look at this and explain it to you while I'm doing the show. the main purpose for having the patch bay in this case is tracking drums. And that's a bulk of the reason why I got into recording to the extent that I am now, is because I want to be able to record acoustic drums more effectively. Acoustic drums is a very complicated process, not only technical, but also artistically, because, you're dealing with a collection of instruments, really, when you boil it down. So I've been tracking drums, and the main thing I'm working on now, I'm very happy with my recorded sound, but I'm working on me and practicing, and of course, we're practicing in hours that are not annoying to the neighbors. So I'm not going to track at 8:30 in the morning on a Sunday right now when I'm recording this. 8:38 technically. No, but for you, it will happen instantaneously. So right now, here's some Ricky on drums, acoustic drums. Let's go. Speaking of testing things out, this was a good test. I say a good test to, really work through problems, but it was annoying. Had a storm come through, knocked the power out for about 11 hours. Fortunately, the weather was great. It was very, in my opinion, perfect. It was like 62 degrees. So that's like the perfect temperature to keep your house at the perfect temperature, right? It's cool enough to where the sunlight heats up the house. So the interior of the house just stays at 68. It's perfect. But still, seriously, it's annoying not having electricity. So my internet, and I it was a lot of criticism, I will say. I do it in a jokingly manner. I'm fully aware of, the rural area that I live in. That's me. I don't want to sound condescending when I talk about the internet in that truck video you can see on my YouTube channel where I take my 65 out for a spin. Obviously, it's a very rural, remote area. So, yeah, naturally, some services are going to be a little sketchy. But I will say the city and the internet service provider really stepped up their game in recent years. And we have fiber in this neighborhood. And it's not just, fiber, any old fiber. It's gigabit symmetrical, which is wild. Gigabit symmetrical meaning a gigabit of speed up and down, which is incredible. I mean, that's like right at the max speed of most Ethernet links, right? Gigabit Ethernet. I mean, so I went through and rewired this house. So everything, this house was wired for Ethernet. So I have everything where I have gigabit on every port in all the rooms now. Because that's something I thought about back in 2004, 2005, when I was thinking, when gigabit internet or gigabit Ethernet was starting to come about. I'm like, well, as for a home user, you would never utilize that, except just for transferring files between computers, right? But now the internet, you have internet that's faster than that now. And out in the country where I see like 20, 30 deer just roaming around. I'm like, I never thought that was going to happen, but greatly appreciate the city and the internet service provider putting their heads together, and of course help from the federal government and just everybody working together to solve a problem with rural internet. And we're seeing that too with satellite. Satellite is a great, I will say, in my opinion, of course, and those of you that have it will have a better opinion and understanding of it too. But satellite internet is a good thing to have as a backup because it suffers from variability, from the atmosphere. You have variabilities in ping time and bandwidth, because your link is still, thousands of miles, right? And it's wireless. So there's always, convenience versus reliability when you're dealing with hardwired or wireless, right? With really anything. So what did that allow me to learn? Well, it allowed me to, in theory, I was thinking I could really increase the capacity of my UPS, uninterruptible power supplies. They're used a lot in IT to keep servers or any kind of critical information service up and running. So I have battery backups on my networking gear here because the internet, again, it's awesome. Even when the power goes out, they have battery backup or generator or something that keeps the internet on. So as long as you can power up your gear in the house, you still have internet. And not only just internet, you still got gigabit internet. So my UPS will run about an hour. So I have about an hour of internet after the power goes off. So I was thinking, well, in theory, I could really increase the battery capacity and connect those on. So really, I did it two ways. I put two bigger batteries, I went from one battery to two batteries, but also two batteries with larger capacity. It's a 12-volt system, so, you've got to connect the two batteries in parallel. Now, part of the design of this, you always have to consider what is it, duty cycle. Obviously, your duty cycle is going to exceed that of the manufacturer's recommendation. It could potentially go into thermal shutdown. It could, overheat it just from it being on for, ideally, it'll be on for 3 days, but in practice, it's on for 2.5 hours now. So an improvement, definitely, I keep that in my head. I lose power. Okay, well, I got 2.5 hours of internet. Just cut the UPS off and cut it back on. And in this case, I actually recharged the batteries using my 65 pickup. Just recharged it using the alternator. It's a 12-volt system. Plugged it up, and it's 13.8 volts off the alternator. It's a 12-volt battery, so just let it sit there and charge up. You have more voltage, more potential, so it's going to charge it up, and it did. So I just kept checking it with the voltmeter. Okay, cool, back charge. Was that all that necessary? No. Read a book, right? The internet's out. If you're working, yes. If you're working from home, yes, it would be critical. But in that case, it's just. It's a good time for me to experiment and prove stuff out. But I will say, if you're working from home or you want to work from home and, you have those things that come up, and I completely understand it from both aspects of an employee wanting to work from home and then your company being a little weary of it because of that, right? Because there's a lot more technical snafus that can happen that's out of your control, right? That's a good way to do it right there. Is I say really probably the best thing you could do is just get a UPS that has a large capacity, like a 24-volt UPS, and that'll run your internet for like 10 hours. Because I actually have two UPSs. My 24-volt system, it runs my switch and my router. but they're just the way everything's wired in. They're two separate rooms, so I'm gonna upgrade my other UPS. So yeah, you got 10 hours of internet. That will pretty much cover you, hopefully, right? Pretty much wherever you live. If you got 10 hours of battery backup, that'll get you through your shift, and then you can reevaluate things the next day. Yeah. Well, I just got to come into work, I guess. All my batteries are dead. So yeah, that's what I've been working on. Speaking about more, really geeky stuff. Now, if you're really, or at least fascinated with, electronics, electrical, radio frequency, there is a movie literally called High Frequency. I would say it's a B movie. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm really just beating it up, because every movie is important to those that make it, right? I will say it's a good solid B movie. It's from 1988, I believe. High Frequency. It's available actually on YouTube. It's not, it's a very low budget movie. So how I found out about it, I was watching it on one cable channel way back, in the early 90s. This movie, if you're not interested in learning about amateur radio, ham radio, or just basically the concepts of it, its importance for a backup for emergency situation, as an example, if you're not interested in that, you watching this, you might get interested in it. It is such a geeky thriller movie. It's really cool. I won't give it away. I won't say any more about that, but check out High Frequency. But be very aware that when you watch it, it's dubbed off of a VHS tape. Even if you were to get the original copy, which was, I don't know, back then it was probably on U-Matic 3/4 tape, right? If you're able to get that, it's still not going to look that good, right? Yeah, it's a low budget movie. Keep that in mind, but also that's what kind of makes the movie cool too. And really, really, just really thinking geeky. There's a very obvious pickup in that movie, a pickup being something that's re-recorded after the initial take to fix problems. It could be a flub line, or it could just be, a line that wasn't picked up properly, or simply a line that was missed. Any kind of mistake, they go back and, redo it. There's a very obvious pickup in the helicopter scene. So see if you noticed that. I noticed that way back then. And it just made me chuckle. I was like, but, they made it work, right? See, that movie exists. That's the cool thing about it. You can sit there and nitpick these low budget productions, but really, to me, it's amazing because, hey, it exists. And not only does it exist, it was broadcast on cable then. Which is cool, right? That's the dream right there. I'm going to make my movie, and it's going to be out there. And it's going to get a lot of people, seeing it, and hopefully understanding your passion, hopefully understanding your story, right? So it's cool. It's a cool movie. It's a really cool movie. It's a weird movie. Very weird. But it's also really interesting. Thank you guys and gals for listening to this episode. I appreciate it. And again, from going forward, from here on out, just got to make this very clear on this show. I am only to be referred to in person when you meet me as Ricky Harris of Ricky Harris Media and Body Shop. Engineer, audio engineer, and talent. That's the only way that Ron Burgundy, right? That movie is so funny because, a lot of that's true, right? In some state, yeah. Hey. It's about getting in that zone, right? And then sometimes you can't get out of that zone. Your head gets so big. You're like, whoa, you got to take a break from being on the air for a while. Come on. Take you a 2-week vacation, right? Come back to reality. All right. That's it, everybody. Thanks for everybody for listening to this episode 9 of the Ricky Harris Media and Body Shop Show. We'll see you guys and gals next time. Later. Bye.